Okay, I think we are live. Hello, Waypoint community. I am so glad y'all are joining today with Dr. Camea Peca. Hello, Miss Camea. So
Yay!
excited. Coming from Arizona. Yes?
Yes,
Okay, perfect. I just love that we're like all over the country and
so
it's
exciting.
just tapping into all of the wisdom. So I met you at Warrior Goddess Weekend in Austin, the great Snowmageddon, Ice-mageddon. Welcome to Texas. Yay. And I just like first impressions of you, you were so grounded, so kind, like taking your notes like crazy. I mean, you were open to learning. And then all the deep conversations at lunch, right? Just to be
Mhm.
surrounded by women that we didn't mess with small chat, small talk.
No.
We did not, right? We got in it. And then, of course, I'm like, okay, who are you? What do you do? And you're like, oh, well, I'm a trauma and resilience holistic healer. And I'm like, yes, of course you are. When you meet people and they're like, yeah, this is what I do. And you're like, this, I don't even actually know you yet, but this 100% makes sense to me. So, in the back of my head, of course, Waypoint Rhonda, I'm like, yeah, she's going to have to come on my show. Like, we're just going to have to talk about this. So, welcome. Thank you. Thank you for saying yes, for being here. I just want to, like, let's just do a kind of a brief, before we jump into it, like your background. How would you describe the work that you do? And how did you get started?
Oh, this is like this. I'll try and make this story short.
Okay.
So I've actually been doing this kind of work, helping people and supporting people through healing processes for over 20 years now. I actually started off working with kids, and I still work with kids. I'm one of the cool things, and one of my joys in life is that I work with 2 and up. So I work with women, adults, and I work
Yeah.
with kids, and it's just a total blessing. But I fell in love with working with kids that were neurodivergent. And I started working with kids that were autistic, and then started working with all different types of other things, and then kind of ended up in the trauma realm as part of
Yeah.
that journey. So I originally trained as an expressive arts therapist in the UK in London, and I actually trained as in psychoanalytic psychology first. And I was like,
Yeah.
psychoanalysis is not me. I'm like,
Okay.
it's
Like,
cool.
good to know. Right.
Well, like, I have a place for it.
Yeah.
And it was really interesting because as I circle back on this and come into the work that I like to do now with women, the archetypes are like all over the place. And I'm
Yeah.
like, see, I knew that degree
That
that
was
you
going to
did
help me. That was going to
over
help
20
me.
years
Yeah.
ago was going to come back in some way, shape, or form. And it totally did with the archetypes and the Jungian and all that cool stuff. But yeah, so I ended up doing expressive arts therapy and really loved it. And moved back from the UK and realized that none of my certifications from the UK worked in the
Oh,
US.
right.
So I was like, okay, girl, what are you going to do now? And,
Yeah.
in the mix there, ended up in a relationship where I have 2 beautiful children, but ended up being a domestic violence relationship. So I ended up going through adult trauma. So adult trauma that was pretty significant and lasted for a couple of years. Or not more than a couple of years, it actually lasted way longer than that. Um, but as I went through
Yeah.
that process and I left that process, I always say everything good that happened to me happened after my trauma, which is kind of
Yeah.
a beautiful thing that I feel very blessed to have moved through it successfully. But it meant that I ended up being a trauma mama. So a mom to 2 kids that had witnessed a domestic violence. And I had been working with kids with trauma forever, but it's different when it's your own kids.
100. Yeah.
And slipped into what I now call, and it's interesting because I see a lot of psychology around functional freeze, but I call it functional dissociation, and I actually call it high achieving dissociation.
Mm.
So a lot of us women that are in toxic marriages, married to narcissists, in bad relationships as adults, will still remain very functional. We'll raise our children. And I think I was a pretty damn good mom. I mean, my
Yeah.
kids are still teenagers, but they haven't done
Yeah.
anything horrible. They're not in jail or anything like that.
Right. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I think I did a pretty good job with that. I ended up going and getting a doctorate. I ended up doing all these things. But if I look back at it, there's like whole chunks of my life during that time that I don't remember. And it's
Yeah.
that dissociative amnesia. So I think what we find is that when women, especially, and I notice the pattern as women go through life, they get to a point where they almost reawaken. And it's a
Mm.
lot of us have been semi-dissociated, functioning, doing our things, running our
Right.
lives. And
Even high achieving.
super high achieving. And
Yeah.
that's a pattern that I've noticed too. And, I run a nonprofit called Ruth Place, which is for female survivors and male survivors of sexual trauma. And a lot of these women have higher degrees. They're extremely intelligent.
Right.
But they have been in these, in these relationships similar to my own. And, some of them starting from childhood, which they obviously had no choice over, but have done this functional dissociative state.
Yeah.
And it's interesting because when we get the kind of kick in the butt or the smack in the face is in middle age. So we kind of get this kind of like shift that happens as we get, and I notice the pattern over and over again. And so my shift now has been like, how do I help people and support people, especially women with trauma, that are now going through that second shift, which is kind of what I call like the reawakening. But it's a transition. So it's, it's a transition. Your whole body changes, your life changes in ways that you never thought imaginable. And for a long time, it's, been vilified as like, oh, these horrible women in perimenopause or postmenopause.
Right.
And it's like, and so for me, I'm like, oh no, this is kind of there's something cool to be had in this period. And I actually ended up, because I had a family history of cancer, I ended up getting a hysterectomy before my 40s. And so my body shifted a little quicker than kind of the normal symptoms. But I remember being like, oh, I'm fine, da, da, da. And then all of a sudden, one year, I remember sitting there, and it was the summer, and Arizona's hot in the summer.
It's Texas
and I was
hot.
sitting there, I'm like, I'm hot, but this is not hot. This is a hot flash. This is like unbearably hot, like want to rip off my skin hot. And I suffered with it for a while before I finally kind of started to do research around like, okay, what does this process look for women that are going naturally through this process, but also women who have started this process early. So that's kind of where I've come to. And so now, like all my time and investment is like, how do we like help, from the inside out? I call it healing from the inside out. So how do we do the body work, the nutritional work, and as well as the soul searching and the soul work. So that's, sorry, that was a really long answer.
No, I love this. This gives such a great context to who you are and how you got here, right? And so, we titled today Midlife Magic. And, I'm 49, I'll be 50 this year. And so I'm like, tell me about midlife magic. So would you like say that phrase, or you think that phrase, what does that mean? Like, what is midlife magic?
So when I kind of came to like, what do we call this without talking about hot flashes and all the other symptoms that are not positive? I'm like, where are we shifting? And I feel like life has all these transitions, and a lot of times because of the challenges that come with them, we vilify them. So we talk about people coming into puberty and how terrible it is, and like then we talk about people coming into menopause and how terrible it is, or midlife, I'm like, there's things to be had in this period of life that are almost magical, and that we get to transform into, and I call it, the wise woman, which is very much the archetypal thing. But we get to leave our childbearing years behind, but we get to open something amazing. And the box that we open is all of the wisdom and the confidence and all the things that we've gained in our journey. And we get to open it in a way that's unashamed. So it's kind of like, here I am, here is who I am. Because I think a lot of times as women, from the time that we go through our first transition, which is, our puberty transition, there's a lot of shame. There's a lot of shame around the body. There's a lot of shame around what's happening in our bodies. There's a lot of shame around comparing and trying to look like everybody else. And I feel like when we get to that midlife magic, it's an opportunity to say, leave it behind. And so for me, it's kind of like a reawakening of, and I call it the reawakening of our teenager self, but wiser, stronger, and more money usually. So
thank you.
Like, we're actually usually in a better place financially than we were as teenagers. So we get to do like all the things. And I was thinking about like yesterday, I was talking to myself. I do that too. But I was thinking to myself about like, what is this like? And I'm like, it's like a midlife, like, it's like a midlife birthday. So like, you get to like an age where you're like, okay, halfway done, what's the next half going to look like? And,
Right.
like we have so many more resources now as women that, that have transitioned through the first 40, 50 years of life. We are better resource than we ever have been in our younger life most of the time.
Yeah.
So we do have the opportunity to do things that maybe we couldn't do because we were raising children, or we were in difficult relationships, or we were still building our, our businesses or our education or whatever it is we were working on. But it's kind of like an opportunity to reopen the doors to everything that you dreamed you could be. And I was thinking about what would my teenager think of me? And I was thinking, oh, she'd think I'm pretty damn cool.
Right? Yeah.
Like,
well, I love that, because that sounds like possibility to me. And that gets me so excited, because we do have more resources and wisdom and just energy, right? To kind of go through this next phase. So you talk a lot about women reclaiming their bodies, especially after trauma. And why do you think, how does that look as far as our bodies being the center of healing? And, especially in this midlife magic point of life.
Yeah. So I think because there's so many things shifting in our body during this period, just, in terms of our body chemistry. So when I think about this, there's hormones, but there's all the other chemistry that goes with this.
Right.
It's an opportunity, again, to kind of like rebalance the system. So we didn't cause the system necessarily to be out of balance, but trauma does. So trauma does cause the system to be out of balance. So when we think about this, we have, whatever we're going through, our body has experienced neurochemically from a trauma perspective, but then we also have all the hormonal changes.
Right.
And it can feel like you're going crazy. So like, this is like a real experience of like, what is happening to me? I can't focus. I feel depressed. I feel more anxious. And these are people like, that I don't think have had some of these experiences, because if they are a dissociator, they push this stuff down.
Right.
So all of a sudden you're like 40, 45, and you're like, oh my God, I can't focus. I have brain fog, like all these things. So when I think about that, I'm like, that's the body. So we have to almost like work on the body first from my point of view, which is like working on, where am I holding trauma? Where am I storing trauma in my body? Is it in my neck? Is it in my shoulders? Is it in my, for women, it's very much, especially with trauma, it's in our hips, it's in our sacral area, it's in our, pelvis. So when we think about this, there's, the neck and the shoulders, but there's also the second part, the second half of the body that we have to attend to. So when I think about, the midlife magic period, it's about really nurturing and taking care of your body. In our first transition, we oftentimes don't even know that it's coming, and we don't know what to do with it. In our second transition, we have the opportunity to use nutrition supplements and also body work to be able to kind of rebuild those things. And because you do the breath work and the lymph, from a longevity perspective, we're going to be living longer than any other generation. So we are really blessed in that way. So we have to think about, okay, now that we know that we're going to be living longer, how do we take care of our wise woman body and nurture her and release anything that we may have held from our younger years, and, go through that process of releasing through the body, but also then coming back into how do we want to be in this next phase. And it's a shift, and it means, changing a lot of things. But I feel like it's one of those shifts that, like, if we're going to be vibrant into old age, which is what all of us want, we need to be able to kind of say like, okay, this is the time. And, it's like, and also the relationship with our body. So as women, just the relationship with our body, like saying, like, oh my God, I remember like forever, all of my 30s after having my kids, I would not wear a 2-piece swimsuit because of my stretch marks and, my little pooch and everything else like that. And I got to, I don't know, like 40, 43, 44. And I was like, you know what, screw it. I'm going to wear a 2-piece swimsuit. Right. It was like, it's not long to come back into. And I remember somebody saying to me, and she was a beautiful woman that was from Africa. And she said to me, oh no, girl, those are your tiger stripes. And I was like, oh,
I
I'm like, I
like
like
that.
that. So
Yeah.
now when I look at them and I wear the bikini, I'm like, those are the tiger stripes.
Yeah.
That's she's like, you earn those from birthing. Those are your tiger
Yeah.
stripes. And I'm like, yes, I love it. But that just gives us also a frame on the Western view of this period versus the
Right.
other, cultures where women in their 40s, 50s, 60s are highly respected in other
Yeah.
cultures and are, very much, I don't want to say worship because that sounds weird, but they're looked at
Yeah.
differently
Right.
versus, oh, you're losing your looks or, like with the stuff that we see in
Right.
Hollywood and the yucky stuff like that, where, oh, she's aging or, it's
Right.
all a competition. So yeah, I feel like there's a lot around along that. And, when we have trauma, we do store it in our bodies. So we have to take care of the body part of that too.
Okay, so let's look at a practical like piece of that. So, your midlife, right? I've
Mhm.
stopped disassociating, right? Because I'm done. I'm done with that, right? And I do think like with disassociation, you reach a point where you just can't anymore, right? It's been chasing you and it catches
Yeah.
you. So as a woman starts to speak her truth or lean into that, what are some of the things she could experience that you're seeing as a pattern, but she's like, oh my God, what is happening?
Mhm.
But you're like, oh no, it's actually happening to everyone. Like, you know what I mean? Like, what
Yeah.
is just something that freaks us out, but you see it as part of the process?
Yeah, I think the biggest thing is like the attention and the cognitive stuff, to be honest with you. I think it's
Okay.
like, I feel like a lot of people with trauma get misdiagnosed with ADHD, because it shows up in women kind of like a lot of ADHD,
Yeah.
especially if you have that particular type of situation. But I've noticed a lot of people feel like they're not sharp. They can't focus. They can't
Yeah.
pay attention. And again, this is high achieving people. So they're like, what is going on with my brain? I feel like my brain is
Right.
fried. Like,
Right.
so like that whole experience of like, that feeling of what is going on. And I think that that's part of it. And then I think we feel some betrayal from our body
Mm.
as she starts to age, and we feel kind
Yeah.
of like, "What's going on with you? Like, why are you turning against me? Like, you've
Yes.
done this for so long, and, like, all of a sudden, you're achy, and you're cranky, and you don't feel and
Yes.
you're tired." Fatigue is
Yeah.
probably one of the biggest things I see, is that kind of and again, medically gets misdiagnosed a lot as, like, chronic fatigue and other things like that, but what I think about is, like, the system is out of balance. And it's out of
Mm.
balance not because you did anything wrong, but sometimes because when we've been in trauma for a long time, we've been out of balance for a long time. And then
Right.
the hormones kick in and it's just like the whole thing just I think of it as like a
Yeah.
snow globe and you shake it up and everything's like, but it's
Ah!
so
Yeah.
chaotic. Yeah.
Yeah.
And I think sleep, I think is another one that like, people were good sleepers and then all of a sudden like their sleep's disrupted and they can't sleep properly.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah.
and I think, another thing is, drive. So some women like completely lose their drive and, depending on where their partner's at in their life,
Yeah.
that can be an issue. And other women, get a resurgence. So they get like kind of that
Yeah.
second puberty drive,
Yeah.
so like it's kind of like, whoa, like there's different things happening with all of our aspects of our body that I think
Yeah.
are challenging. And also we don't talk about it. So
Right.
like that's the other problem
I
is
do.
like,
Oh, sorry. I think it's easier to say like, oh, hormones, not, oh, actually, I'm in a point in my life where I'm releasing trauma, right? It's just way more acceptable to be like, yeah, hormones gone crazy, but it's more complicated than that. It's that snow globe effect of everything all together.
yeah, yeah,
So if you were working with someone who, it's trauma, right? It's midlife, it's the snow globe effect. Do you have any place for them to start? Like start here.
yeah.
Like, or here's an easy practice, or here's a place to gently lean into this.
Yeah.
Where do you start with people?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think I always start with people kind of figuring out what their profile, their dysregulation profile is. So, that's part of like the process that I do with people is like, are you somebody that generally goes high into anxiety, aggression, those type of
Yeah.
things, or you're somebody that goes low into disassociation, shutdown, numbing, addictive behaviors, that type of stuff. Because what you do with your body to reawaken it or to work with it is going to be different depending on what type of dysregulation you experience.
Right.
And so like, I'm very much about like customizing things. Now, some people are flip-floppers and they do both. So like, then we kind of look at it from that aspect, but I never want to give somebody something that isn't specific to their body and their dysregulatory style. So some of this is just starting to be curious. Okay, what happens when I feel this way, or when I get activated, or when I'm in this situation? And relationships are always the biggest trigger or activator of trauma responses. So when we think about that, it's like, okay, what's happening in your relationships right now? Where do you go? Do you go high or do you go low? And then thinking about then, okay, how do we start working with that? And some people that go low are associated aren't interoceptively aware, which means they don't feel what's going on internally. So for them, the first step is to start to build practices where we're doing like more awareness of what's happening in your body right now. Where does it sit? And being curious about that and not being scared of it, not shutting it down and not getting anxious about it, but just being curious about it. And then we start to shift it. But we have to be aware of it before we can shift it. So it's kind of, it's a pattern that sometimes people will find like an activity or something like that. And I'm like, okay, first we need to have awareness. Then we need to have, curiosity. Then we go into release, and then we go into reset. And the reset is often where people start. They see something online or whatever, and they're like, oh, this is really cool. But it's a reset. It's not the release. So I always tell people you have to release before you reset. And the release is a lot more of the stuff that we're doing now to reset the vagus nerve, the things like, the cold plunges, the breathing, the stuff like that. That's more intense because we need to release it out of our body.
Body keeps the score.
And then we bring it down. So we release it and then we bring it down. So we know from all the somatic, science that we now have that you have to release it. Awareness, release, reset,
love,
and restore.
Oh, we're already almost out of time. Oh my gosh. Okay. What
sorry.
When we talk about midlife magic, what gives you the most hope on where we're at right now?
I just believe that as our generation, I mean, there's so many disgusting things happening in the world, but I won't even get into that. But our generation has the most resources as women to be able to transition into the second stage of life successfully with the support of each other. I believe that our community and being in community with other women is so important. And it's the biggest healer of trauma. And it's also the biggest way that we can transition. And remember that in tribal cultures, we would have had a group of women. We would have had elder women. We would have had younger women. We would have had all the different people together. And so when we went through this process, we would start to gain this kind of knowledge, this respect, this connection with each other. So for me, I'm like, I feel excited about doing all the things that I didn't get to do when I was raising kids, younger kids, little kids. My kids are teenagers. I still have kids, but that I didn't get to do then, that's really for me. And I feel like it's a me period. And it's not that we don't love our families, but this is a period to reclaim what we always wanted to do, to step into our dreams, to say, okay, I've paid my dues. What do I want?
What do I want? Like, that's the big ticket question, right? What do I want? And it always comes back to, what did little Rhonda want? I mean, what did teenage Rhonda want? Like, they're always connected every single time. Like, she'll tell you, right? Look back at what you did. Okay.
And it's interesting. Whenever I do those visualizations, I'm always 5. So I always
okay, I'm 7. I'm always 7. Yeah. I love that. Okay. Which is so curious to me. I'm sure there's significance in that, right? What age you go back to. And maybe that's where you were really in power of that.
Usually
point.
5 to 8. So usually from a developmental perspective, it's usually somewhere between 5 and 8. We don't really remember a lot before 5, sometimes a little bit if it's bad, but not like good stuff. So 5 to 8 is usually our period before we get domesticated, where we're just like happy, vibrant, amazing little girls. And so like for me, I'm like, call back on her, ask her, be curious. What did she want? Yes, absolutely.
Okay, so this has been amazing. I feel like we could talk for hours, literally. But if people want to connect with you, you have a growingspace.com and then on your Instagram,
Yep.
because I'm sure you would talk about this for hours as well.
Yes,
So
absolutely.
beautiful. Okay, I want to close with this. So if midlife truly is magic, what is one word that you invite women to hold on to as they step into this next chapter?
So my word of the year, which I think is the word for midlife magic too, is sovereignty. But
Mm.
I always think of myself, what kind of queen do you want to be?
What kind of queen do you want to be? Okay, I need everyone to write that down because I think that's like the journal topic for this week. What
Yes,
kind of queen do you want to be?
because we're no longer
Ah, brilliant.
princesses and we're no
Yep,
longer maidens, we're queens.
we
So what kind of
are.
queen do we want to
Want
be?
to be. Oh, I love that.
Mhm.
Oh, Dr. Pika, thank you so much for joining
Thank
us
you.
today. This has been a really fun conversation and just where I'm at in my life, so much hope, right? So much
Yeah.
hope. So awesome. Okay, well, I have a feeling you're going to be back. So until next
Yes,
time, all right,
always.
until next time. Awesome. All right. Thank you so much.